Proteus Leadership proudly presents the Let's Go, Let's Grow podcast with Des Penny, founder of Proteus Leadership.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Let's Go, Let's Grow podcast, part one of a two-part series. I'm Des Penny, and today I want to talk about living and leading with insight. This is without a doubt one of the most important things that I've tried to work on and tried to adopt into my life during all my years in leadership, because I believe insight is a difference between a great leader and a good leader. In fact, it's the missing link for me in leadership. But it is hard work and requires dedication, but the benefits of living this way are definitely endless. I also think that having the ability to live and lead with insight is not only one of the most important goals we can aim for, it's also one of the least discussed topics around leadership today. But it's been a topic that I've had a personal interest in for many years, based both on my own leadership experiences over my 50 years in leadership, yes, 50 years, and also through watching so many leaders around me struggle as a result of not having it and not really understanding its importance to their lives. So let me give you an example up front around the beginnings of insight. Have you ever had someone come into your life or your community or your workplace and everyone thought they were wonderful, but there was something deep down inside of your gut that just said, well, maybe I don't think they're quite as good as everybody else is thinking. I'm not sure what it is. Or the other way around, that someone's come into your life and people have immediately criticised that person, and you've seen deeper than that, and you've looked at them and thought, you know what, I see some real potential in that person. Well, these are just the beginnings of insight, and this is how insight works. It heightens those thoughts and feelings, and it helps us to get it right more often, especially about people. But it's not until we understand what insight is and what it can do for us do we discover that with it, it can literally change who we are, the way we lead, certainly the decisions we make in life. Because insight is not just a new skill, it's a way of life and the key that opens the door to being a great person. And guess what? Great people make great leaders. So why don't we spend more time on becoming better people rather than just upgrading our skills all the time? But having this insight in our daily lives is not as easy as it sounds, because insight actually makes us aware of what is really happening around us, both good and bad. And once we become aware of those things, then we can't hide from them or put our head in the sand ever again, because we're forced now to make decisions. And because insight does demand action from us, it takes willpower and a real desire to actually want to live and lead with insight. And unfortunately, because of this, many people choose to take the easy road and never really get to understand the positive difference insight can bring to their lives. Instead, they revert to old habits and are constantly frustrated as they deal with the same issues and challenges year after year, while others simply decide it's too hard and choose to live without it. But then there are others who actually choose not to live with insight because they wouldn't know what to do without constant drama in their lives. I bet wherever you are listening to this podcast right now, you know someone like that. But as I said, living with insight makes us better people, and it's better people that make better leaders. You know, right now we're living with so much noise in our lives, and all that noise stops us from making great decisions. I deal with and work with hundreds of leaders every year, and so many of them have been coming to me lately and saying, Des, the world's gone mad. It just doesn't feel right anymore. I thought I was in control of my life and my job, but now I don't know what to do. I don't know what to think. I actually don't know who I'm meant to be. And this is coming from some very senior people. And I certainly have experienced that myself, and maybe as a listener, you've been experiencing that also. Well, the wonderful thing about insight is that it helps us to eliminate the unnecessary so that the necessary can be heard. It helps us to get back on track. Now, you're going to hear me say that quite a bit over this two-part series. Insight helps us to eliminate the unnecessary so that the necessary can be heard. It helps us get back on track. In fact, I think insight is life's filtration system, because we get involved in so many things we don't need to be involved in. So before we can ever live with insight, we need to remove the unnecessary from our lives. And that's where insight comes in. But it's also important to understand that the only person who can choose to eliminate the unnecessary and get some perspective back is you. It's not about other people or circumstances or the new world we live in, because that's a cop-out. It's not about blame. It's simply about you. And for my life, it's simply about me. And that's why so many people choose not to live this way, because with insight also comes responsibility. And that's simply not what many people want right now. In fact, society is doing everything it can to shed personal responsibility. It's far easier to blame and complain. The trouble is that when we do this, we miss out on so much that life is offering us. You know, my search for insight personally started in the boardroom in 1993, and some of you will know my story. But it's also about why I started Proteus Leadership as a company. I can remember sitting on the board, on the executive, and there were 6 other guys sitting there with me. Yes, all guys at that time. And I looked around the boardroom table at our senior leadership team, and I didn't like what I saw. They were smart, they were intelligent, but they had absolutely no insight. Why? Because they simply didn't care enough. These incredibly intelligent men had no insight into their behaviours or the consequences of what they said and did. And it was during this time that I realised that I was going from fixing one disaster to the next, constantly feeling the same issues return. Again, I bet that sounds familiar to many of you listening today. And this is when I decided I didn't want to be like them or live and lead like them. There had to be a better way. And so in 1993, I stepped out and commenced Proteus Leadership. And just like those people who've been speaking to me lately a little confused, this was my moment to ask myself, why am I doing this? How does this help fulfill my purpose? And do I really know what that purpose is? We hear so much about understanding our why and knowing our purpose, but the truth is that without insight, we never experience the reality of what we could achieve. And therefore, we never fully understand our why or our true purpose. Rather, everything becomes a battle, and even our wins are hard work and short-lived. I heard a wonderful quote by Tony Schwartz. He was the author of a book called The Way We're Working Isn't Working, where he asks us this: is the life you're leading worth the price that you're paying to lead it? Think about it. Is the life you're leading worth the price you're paying to lead it? You know, before we can even move into living and leading with insight, we need to stop and evaluate where we're at. Otherwise, our quest for insight just gets caught up in the busyness of life and the unnecessary noise. So I want to challenge every one of you listening to this podcast to first eliminate the unnecessary noise from your life. We all know what that unnecessary noise is, but for different reasons we just fail to deal with it. During COVID, I was in a pretty dark place for a while, trying to adapt and pivot in my own life and also with my family and relationships, while at the same time trying to keep a business going and ensuring that none of my 20 staff at the time would be unemployed. All of this while living in Melbourne, Australia, the world's most locked down city. Woohoo, we were world lockdown champions. So proud. It was during this time that I witnessed leadership at its most selfish worst and witnessed an absolute lack of any insight. In fact, I flew to Queensland at the top of Australia to recalibrate, to be joined by my partner a week later. During that week, everything shut down in both states, and we spent the next 5 months apart. But prior to that, in April 2020, at the beginning of lockdown, I found myself curled up in the corner of my bedroom, sobbing my heart out and thinking the worst. I knew I had to do something or we would simply go under. Decisions had to be made, and they had to be made quickly. 30 years of building a business could be gone, and I was about to lose everything, both personally and professionally. During that time, I experienced thoughts and behaviours that I never thought possible, both negative and positive. I also experienced incredible loneliness and confusion. What now? And I know that I'm telling the story of literally thousands of other people, but this is how it related to me. And what it forced me to do was to face these thoughts and do something about them, because I didn't like the possible alternatives. And as I did that, I remembered the years of being brave that preceded COVID. And it was the actions we took during these years that allowed me now to draw on that well of experience. This was the moment that insight kicked back in, and I saw in the middle of hopelessness some real opportunities. And I can remember physically saying to myself, "Get up, Des, take back the controls. You are better than this." But with so much noise in my life and so many decisions that needed to be made, I really needed a circuit breaker, something to help me do that before I literally went crazy. So I created a simple little model that I used to achieve this, and I continue to use it when trying to get things to make sense, because it worked and it centered me. So I share it with you now. It's called the STOP model, and it's my version of meditation, mindfulness, and refocusing on a daily basis. And as I've already said, before we can move into living a life with insight, we need to eliminate the noise and refocus by stopping and settling our spirit. Stop the madness, because it will not move us forward. So wherever you are right now, if you're at home or in the office or in the car, do this with me. Think of a situation that's getting on top of you right now and creating unnecessary noise that seems to be overpowering everything else. And let's step through this simple model called the STOP model. The S stands for slow down. We need to remove the busyness and the noise, as I've said. We need to stop trying to do everything at once. Relax. Chill out. Remove yourself from the situation for periods of time if that's what it takes. But above all, give your mind permission to rest. I know it might seem hard in the middle of confusion, but we can't progress until we do it. We can't start the healing until we learn to control what we can. And our mind is one of those things. I now use this simple model to put every challenge in my life into perspective. Slow down, deal with the busyness, relax, chill out, and give your mind permission to rest. Once we've done that and created some space, the T stands for take stock. Where are you really at? What's really important? What are your non-negotiables? What do you need to prioritise? How are you behaving? Why are you so frustrated? Is what you're thinking reality? You see, if we don't understand our current position, then we'll blow everything out of proportion and live in a constant state of frustration and blame. So be honest, take stock right now and identify where you're really at, because unless we know the real situation, we can't find real solutions. The third step is O, own it. Guess what? It's not everyone else's fault. Acknowledge where you're at and what changes you will make. In other words, take responsibility for your 100% of your 50%. Because until it's your responsibility and not someone else's, you will never understand insight. Own it. The things happening in your life right now are on you, no one else. The things happening in my life right now are on me, no one else. Own them. That's why so many people never progress past this point and therefore never experience a life with insight or truly discover their why, because they refuse to own their situation. Once we've slowed down, once we've taken stock, and once we've truly owned our situation, we then move to step 4, which is the P, to proceed. Do something. Find purpose again. Regain your energy. Achieve results. Make things better right now where you are. Don't try to do everything, but take the first step towards possibility. But remember, this model is an ongoing process, not just a once-off activity. So now that you understand this simple model, find some time alone to truly go through the 4 steps. You know, I have this model on my office wall, and I constantly use it to refocus and rebalance on a daily basis. Slow down, take stock, own it, and then proceed. Whenever I'm starting to feel overwhelmed or beginning to be critical, I look up and I take myself through the stop model. I refocus, I rebalance, and recognize that every situation is in my hands and the decisions that need to be made are my decisions to make. Because doing nothing gets you nowhere. Maybe right now we all need to stop the struggle and step back a little bit and refocus. Let me give you an example of how I use this during COVID. Slow down. A business that I'd built over 30 years and poured my life into was now overnight seemingly obsolete. The stress of this was overwhelming. I had to step out of the problem. I had to chill out and bring some reality to the situation. We then took stock. So we go under and lose everything, or we get creative and bring about change. Where were we really at? We were only dwelling on the problem. What was our real situation? What were the positives and possibilities in all of this? And once we took stock, the situation looked very different. We then had to own it. This was not someone else's problem to fix. It was ours. We had to own it. We had to change our attitude. If not, we would go under. We had to take back the controls. Only we could bring change to this situation. And now we had to proceed. So I got a small group of staff together and said, let's do this. In 3.5 weeks, we became one of the most significant virtual training companies in the country. In that time, we purchased equipment. We set up studios across Australia. We rewrote all of our materials. We retrained our team. We spent money we didn't have. We worked our butts off. We didn't know what we were doing half of the time, and the learning curve was steep, but we proceeded and we did it. Today, our business is in the best place it's ever been. But we couldn't have done it if we hadn't taken the time to slow down, take stock, own our situation before we proceeded. So many individuals and businesses are looking at their situation right now through the lens of the problem and getting more frustrated every day. But when we learn to live through the stop model, we discover insight and start to make the decisions based on what is possible, not just through what we see in front of us. A copy of this model can be found by clicking on the show notes. One of the things that really helped me to understand insight was discovering that it's not only achievable, but something we can all learn if we truly want to. Because living and leading with insight is not about getting everything right or being perfect. It's about being bold enough to do what you believe is right and then learn and grow from your mistakes. But like everything, we can never really embrace something until we understand what we're dealing with. So, what is insight? Well, the good old dictionary says this: insight is the capacity of understanding hidden truths, specifically of people's character and the reality of situations. Let me repeat that. Insight is the capacity of understanding hidden truths, not obvious ones, hidden truths, specifically of people's character and the reality of situations. This means that insight allows us to look deeper into a situation. It allows us to see past what seems obvious to what's really happening. It's very similar to what some people call a root cause analysis. So, insight helps us not just to live our lives through what we see with our natural eyes, where we react, but to look deeper and find the real truth in the situation so we can respond. And there's a huge difference between reacting and responding. But also, to live with insight, we must decide if we want to embrace it, because it is hard work and comes with conditions. Because insight is all about seeing past the obvious to the reality of a situation. In other words, to see what's really happening. Is that what you want? Can you be bothered? Remember, if we don't pursue insight, we will never really understand or live out our why or our purpose. I was coaching a senior leader once who said they never look back. It's a negative thing to do. So I asked them this very simple question. So if you never look back, how do you learn? They didn't get it. It went straight over their head. Because it's imperative and healthy to look back, as long as we do it to learn how to be better, or to celebrate and not to whip ourselves and constantly dwell on the mistakes of the past. We need to refocus and see our past as creating future possibilities, because this is how insight works. Insight equals hindsight plus foresight. When we learn from the past and are brave enough to plan for the future, we start to develop insight for the now. The challenges and lessons learned from COVID changed me forever. I constantly look back at what we did with pride, because it helps me look forward to what we now need to do. As I said, our business has never been in such a good place, but it was insight and bravery from our team that got us there. So to start introducing insight into our behaviours, let's look at the insight development model I created to highlight the components of insight. In this simple model, there are 4 factors we need to develop if we are to truly live and lead with insight. Remember, insight must be learned, and like everything else, it is a process, not a spooky God-given right. But unless we're prepared to adopt these 4 factors into our lives, we will never experience it. The first factor is care. To care deeply about ourselves and others, and care enough to do something, we need to give a damn. Because no care equals no insight. You cannot have insight if you don't care. What really scares me more than anything now is that we are creating a self-entitled, lack of care world where people are really only thinking of themselves. And when we do that, insight disappears from our society. I don't want to live like that. I don't want you to live like that. So this first factor is really the underpinning factor for everything else. We have to care about ourselves, about others, about doing something. The second factor is to listen. And I mean to truly listen to what people are saying. Not just the superficial, but deep listening that is only possible through care. This then needs to be combined with factor 3, and that is to watch. Observe people's facial expressions and behaviours. Do they match their words? Do we care enough to see what's really happening? Or is there something not quite right? What about their body language clues? Also look for their passion. When I'm interviewing for people at Proteus Leadership, one question I ask everyone is this: tell me something you're passionate about. And some people respond by saying, well, nothing really. And guess what? That's exactly what they bring to the workplace. And others say, well, actually, I really love bushwalking or some other hobby, and you can see their face light up. Let me tell you, that's huge. That's the passion they will bring to the workplace and their job. But we need to stop judging and watch and observe what's really happening. And the fourth factor is to act. Don't just talk about it. Are you prepared to act? If not, don't put yourself through the torture of developing the first three, because you could make the situation far worse. Insight acts. So let's care. Let's listen. Let's truly watch. And then, through insight, we can take the appropriate action for that particular situation. To truly understand and develop insight in our lives, we must practice and develop these four factors. Otherwise, it's not possible to experience it. In part 2 of my Living and Leading with Insight podcast series, I want to look at the characteristics of people living with insight and how we can start the practical process of adopting insight into our lives. So if you've enjoyed this podcast, then I look forward to you joining me again for part 2. Don't forget to download a copy of the STOP model by clicking on the show notes. You've been listening to the Let's Go, Let's Grow podcast. I'm Des Penny, thanking you for listening, and I encourage you to sign up on your favourite podcast platform so that you can enjoy further episodes as they drop.